Hey, so welcome everybody. My name is Christine Clark, and I'm a program manager at the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. I'm situated in Vancouver, which is the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I co-organize a community-led climate action program called STARCAP. But before I talk more about the program, I want to talk about why we're gathered today. I really just want to uplift the way our presenters today pose the question that introduces our topic. And it's, what would it take to live in a world where our needs are met, where communities and individuals flourish, where humans, animals, and the natural world are cared for and not exploited? This is the vision of solidarity economics. And in today's workshop, Dionne and Naisha of Solid State Community Industries will introduce us to solidarity economics, worker cooperatives, and alternative ways of organizing work via democratic forms of ownership that put people and planet over profits. Now, CCEDNet is hosting this screening as part of STARCAP, which is the Synergia Transition and Resilience Climate Action Program. And this is a partnership with Synergia Institute and Athabasca University. The STARCAP features a massive open online course, also known as a MOOC, called Towards Cooperative Commonwealth, Transition in a Perilous Century, which explores just transitions and sustainable futures from a practical, holistic, and community-led perspective. Now, its title tells the story. This future must be one that is cooperative. And the MOOC explores examples of cooperation worldwide. And this workshop that we're offering today complements those global examples with a story closer to home, one of youth leaders coming together to build a solidarity economy in the city of Surrey, British Columbia. Now, before we begin, a few notes. Today's webinar features closed captions and live interpretation from English to ASL and not a pre-recorded edited translation. Kevin Klein is our ASL interpreter. So welcome, Kevin, thank you. We also ask that participants limit conversations happening in the chat so as not to have the chat box pop up and become intrusive for those who are accessing the closed captions. Now, our presenters do have some activities where they'll invite responses in the chat, and it's fine to use it then. And in that case, the chat responses will be read aloud as an accessibility measure. So with that said, I'm really excited to have our co-presenters today, Naisha Khan and Dionne Ko. And Dionne, take it away. And Dionne will take it away as soon as I share my screen and present these slides. Give me one moment, folks. Go ahead, Dionne.
Oh, thanks everyone. And I'm also experiencing some internet connectivity issues. So there is a chance that I might get logged out and have to log back in again. So I apologize in advance if that happens. But hello, thank you so much for coming today to our presentation this Wednesday afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. So for my part of this discussion, we will be talking about solidarity economics more broadly, some related concepts and histories, and some tangible examples from our work at Solid State. So to make the most out of this workshop, I recommend getting a notebook, a pen, some paper, something to write with, just to take notes and some reflections while we talk and discuss together. Feeling super excited to present today alongside Christine Clark and Naisha Khan, my colleagues, who I also am super lucky to call my friends. So next slide, please.
And Dionne, just quickly, is your camera off just because you're experiencing those tech difficulties?
Oh, sorry, I didn't even notice my camera was off. I think is it good now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, so to begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge where all of this work takes place. On the slide, you'll see two images side by side. On the left is an illustrated map of Surrey, where Solid State is located. And on the right is the event poster showing Solid State members convening over food in a circle. So right now, I'm currently in our office at Solid State, which is located in a region south of the Fraser River, on the unceded ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katsi, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kakait, and Coquitlam peoples, which is also colonially known as Surrey, British Columbia. So at Solid State, most of us are immigrants, first, second, and third generation immigrants, and most of us are racialized, moving from countries from the global south into here. And to me, that poses a kind of tension, you know, immigrant settlers living on the land of indigenous people. Surrey is also an interesting city, one of the most diverse cities here in BC, if not the most. The 2021 census reported that for the first time, more BIPOC folks, visible minority people, live here than white folks and settlers. So if you live here or have ever lived around Vancouver, you'll know that Surrey has an infamous reputation for unsafety, crime, and threats of gang violence. And though there is some little truth to it, most of those sentiments are actually racially coded and xenophobic in nature. Next slide, please. So how did I find myself here in the first place? Let me backtrack a little bit and introduce some of myself to you. So on this slide, you'll see an illustrated world map with two cities marked on the left and on the right. On the left is Vancouver, BC, where I currently live on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. On the right is Manila, Philippines, the city where I was born and raised. So again, my name is Dionne Ko. My pronouns are she, her. I'm of Filipino Chinese descent. I grew up speaking 3 languages, English, Tagalog, and Chinese. My ancestors moved from China to the Philippines around the 19th century, but we didn't keep records, and I'm only sure about my father's side because my mother was adopted and doesn't know about her roots. I moved to Vancouver about 8 years ago from the Philippines, a country that was triply colonized, first by the Spaniards, and then the Americans, and then the Japanese. That brutal history left our country with a weak state, corrupt politicians, poor public infrastructure, and not a lot of options. So for reasons both personal and political, I left. You might also notice in the slide that there are photos of dogs located in each city marked on the map. So as I was reflecting on how I arrived here today, talking to you about solidarity economies, I realized that my introduction to the solidarity economy actually began with animals, specifically the dogs I grew up with, observing them and loving them and bearing witness to the ways we helped each other without ever needing words. And today I'm super lucky to care for 2 amazing dogs, Horace and Leela, who you see on the left. And I honor the memory of my dogs who have passed away, from Manila. And in addition to all that, I also have a master's degree in urban studies and did my bachelor's in English and sociology. My past work experiences have mostly been within academic and nonprofit sectors, mostly in a research capacity. I am also an illustrator and a co-founder of an urban consulting workers co-op called City in Color. Okay, next slide, please. But today I'm talking to you as part of my role as research director at Solid State. But what is Solid State exactly? So on the slide, from left to right, you'll see 3 images. On the left, the top image is a group photo of some of our staff at one of our co-op offices that actually belongs to Ethos Lab, one of our first cohorts in Vancouver. Another is a candid photo of a group working at our Surrey office. And on the right, the big image, you'll see some of our members having lunch, which is a practice I'll talk about in a second. So Solid State is an economic development agency that builds worker cooperatives and solidarity economic forms with a focus on BIPOC and racialized immigrant members. Since starting in 2015, we've had over 150 members and over 20 cohorts across different industries, some for profit and some not for profit, ranging from food, design, media, art, STEM, all the way to urban consulting, peer and counseling support, events planning, climate organizing, and cleaning. Recently, we've just received significant funding from the BC government to create 50 new worker co-ops in blue-collar industries, like delivery, logistics, food production and manufacturing. And so we are super excited to get those going too. So Solid State is an unusual workplace in that we have no bosses and relationships are pretty congenial. And we have lots of autonomy over when, where, when, how, and with whom we work. Everyone has the same hourly wage from directors to cleaners to coordinators to designers. And we also employ 3 cooks who make us lunch every day. And so around that, we've built a collective ritual where all of us who are in the space gather at 12 noon to check in and eat before we start our day. It's an unbelievably amazing workplace and probably my best job to date. Next slide, please. And so I'd like to move on to a collective reflection activity, thinking about our worst work experiences. And I understand the irony of doing this activity after I just sang praises about my work at Solid State. So, okay, let's pause for a bit here. So when I ask you to think about your worst work experience, what comes to your mind? Was it an old job or maybe even a current job? What feelings are coming up for you? How were your relationships at work? With your boss, your colleagues? Did you like your boss? Did you like your colleagues or not? How were your relationships outside of work? With your family, your partner, your kids, pets, friends? Were you able to be present with them? How was the pay? Did you feel like you were being compensated and recognized for the work that you gave? Did you work more hours than you needed to? And how about the work itself? Did you enjoy the work? Did it speak to your gifts and your passions? Or was the work closer to drudgery? Let's take a couple of minutes to think about this and reflect. And I'd also like to invite either Christine or Naisha, both of you, one of you to respond to my question. And let's have a bit of an interaction in this portion.
Yeah, thanks, Dionne. So I just want to, give an example while folks are thinking about this question. And it's interesting because you said, it's kind of ironic talking about your worst work experience, but it was actually me reflecting on my worst work experiences that brought me to the co-op sector. Because my work experiences are ones where I didn't feel that all of my work was being recognized and my contributions valued. And that's largely because I've often felt like I've been working what I call a second shift. So it's the job that I was contracted to do, but then it's all of the labor of having to navigate discrimination in the workplace. And on top of that, when I had, brought those, and everything from the weight of microaggressions to discriminatory comments, and when I would bring these concerns forward, I would then be tasked with, okay, well, you can be our DEI person and, be the department to solve these problems. And this is what I mean by this second shift that I felt like I was working and that I wasn't, hired for, nor was those contributions being valued in terms of a pay raise and nothing like that. And so the co-op sector was one where what really drew me to it was this idea that particularly those most discriminated against at work could come together and build businesses and create work cultures that worked for them, that worked for us, because we were the bosses. And so it's interesting that yeah, you're asking us to reflect, and I think it's in reflecting on the work that we don't want, then we start generating ideas about the work that we do want to do. And in this way, co-ops can be that business model that actually allows us not just to think about it, but to actualize it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Christine, like your comment about the second shift and like what sounds like emotional labor is pretty common as a thread that, like, you know, obviously like we're not able to share in this space right now, but I'm gonna guess that a lot of our experiences with our worst work experience has to do with, like, you know, this giving and not receiving in return. So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. So yeah, like while the specifics of our worst work experiences may vary, it does remain that we are similar in these stories of horrible bosses, of difficult colleagues, of just work that is not meaningful, dispassionate, and detached from who we are. And so why is this? Well, if you're in this workshop today, you probably already well know the reasons. That we live under capitalism that is also built upon racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, transphobia, homophobia, and xenophobia, what the late bell hooks called imperialist white supremacist heteropatriarchy, a stifling system where winners and losers exist, where the game is zero sum, and where only a few can flourish at the expense of the suffering of many. And with the climate crisis, it's becoming clearer and clearer that this cannot go on. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Dionne. I wanted to suggest, because I know you gave folks 2 minutes to reflect on that activity, and I shared within that time. So I just wanted to go back and give participants just a couple minutes to reflect, you know, on their work experiences, and then we come back and continue with the presentation. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. And just to clarify, are participants encouraged to share in the chat or just keep it as a silent reflection?
You know, I'm seeing that we do have time. So yeah, how about we invite participants to share in the chat and we can read some of the responses.
Sounds good. I already see one from Omar, feelings of inferiority and disrespect.
So yeah, just take a couple minutes, and then when you're ready, if you feel like you want to reflect some of those experiences in those personal reflections in the chat, please do.
I see a response from Diana. After being hired, I found out that the position I took had a 6-month turnover. Staff felt superior to the support person. It was really degrading. Sasha, working as a healthcare provider in a sexist, racist environment. Paul, housing that was tied to work and feelings of extreme vulnerability when it came to interpersonal conflict with boss. Holly, no autonomy, few resources and little training, no mission or purpose. Yeah, all very valid answers. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, everybody. And I think that some of those answers also reflect what Dionne is presenting with the bell hooks quote here, that a lot of our work is rooted in these oppressive frameworks. Thank you, Dionne, for this reflection. Would you like me to continue to the next slide?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, so yes, so here we are today together because we live in that kind of world in this kind of world, and we want to build something different, something better. And so this is where the solidarity economy comes in. So on this slide, you'll see the definition of solidarity economics and examples of different models under this umbrella. So solidarity economics is a set of ideas and practices about alternative ways of engaging in the economy that aim to prioritize shared values and social good over purely financial profits. So some examples of forms under the solidarity economy are worker co-ops, which Naisha would talk about more in depth later, fair trade initiatives, credit unions, resource libraries, community gardens, and open source free software. Next slide, please. And in here, I want to talk briefly about the histories of the solidarity economy. And it's plural, there are multiple lineages to this. So here you'll see a visual depicting a red circle in the middle connecting to 5 other branches that describe the different branches, the different connections that have shaped the solidarity economy. So we'll go clockwise from the lower left with the Rockdale pioneers over to the other side. Okay, so dominant history tells us that cooperativism and solidarity economies began in 19th century Europe with the Rockdale pioneers, who formulated the 7 co-op principles that we still use today, and that Naisha will be touching upon later. But obviously, this is a limited history, and while valuable, is just one piece of the larger puzzle. Indigenous groups across Turtle Island have practiced solidarity economy since time immemorial. This merging of the personal and the economic, the importance of using our bodies and crafting and handiwork in making a living and having a more circular way of life that we might still observe today. From the work of Dr. Carolyn Shinaz Hussain primarily and other Black scholars in Canada, we also learned that African groups and nations have solidarity economics embedded within language. So the word Ubuntu is a Bantu word meaning I am because we are. And the word Ujima is a Swahili word that means collective work and responsibility. But it's also something that I've heard translated as making our brothers and sisters' problems our own so that we can solve them together. In recorded history in pre-industrial societies, we've also seen solidarity economic forms across Asia, specifically in China, India, and the Philippines. So in the Philippines, in Tagalog, we have a word called kapwa, which means this sense of connectedness through an inner self that is shared with others, which also lies at the heart of Philippine ethics. Latin America is also often credited as one of the cradles for solidarity economies, specifically with the Economía Solidaria movements in Chile, Peru, and Argentina. And finally, I put there on the last one that the solidarity economy can also be attributed to people, animals, plants, all over time and space. And I credit my co-speaker, Naisha, for this idea. A few months ago, I heard Naisha speak at an event with Banking for a Better Future about the solidarity economy as a very intuitive way of being. And that to me was very moving and true. And I really agree with that. So next slide, please. Okay. So let me pause here to introduce the latter half of my presentation, which are the 5 principles and practices of solidarity economics. So in the slide, you'll see all 5 listed. The first, collective care, relationships, and responsibility. Second, shared resources and shared vision. Third, liberation culture. Fourth, democracy and process. And 5th, education and development. And on the right is a photo of some solid state members at our last button making workshop, which was super fun and was generously co-hosted by the Union Co-op Initiative as part of the Mayworks Festival of BC. So next slide, please. So as we go through the principles in the next 5 slides, this is what I'll do. I'll read the text under each principle and then elaborate after I've read all the bullet points. So principle number 1, collective care and responsibility. This word responsibility, this is often also interchangeable with accountability, but I think I prefer the word responsibility because it evokes in me a more humanistic way of relating rather than accountability, which has a bit of a transactional balance sheet connotation in my opinion, but I think both terms are valid. So under this principle, we value relationships over transactions. We care for each other in good times and hard times, in celebration and in conflict. We build and honor our networks under the premise and ethic of anti-individualism. And we make decisions based on both the short term and the long term, asking questions like, are the decisions we're making good for people? Is it good for the earth, good for animals? And especially, is it good for future generations? So this is, under this, we acknowledge the hard work, the hard interpersonal work of figuring out how to live and work together. And at Solid State and in other solidarity economic organizations, we embrace conflict as something generative and clarifying. And so, you know, while this is like a very idealistic notion, the practice itself can be very ugly sometimes. You know, there's hurt feelings, there's hurtful words that have been said, but ultimately there's a larger purpose to this sort of relational way of being, that we don't avoid difficulty and that we go through it together. And so we work with that friction and hope that we come up with something better than just doing it alone. Next slide, please. So principle number 2, shared resources and shared visions. So under this, we reject the myth of scarcity and embrace the possibility of abundance. We create that abundance through cooperation and sharing resources. These resources might take the form of knowledge, data, funds, time, networks, connections, jobs, publicity, and learning opportunities. And we do this by investing directly in solidarity economic initiatives and cooperatives. So as much as possible, we prioritize direct financial gifts with no strings attached, such as forgivable zero interest loans or member-controlled seed funding, like seed commons. You might have heard about that. ROSCAs, rotating savings and credit associations, participatory budgeting, and collective strategic planning, making sure that those impacted by your decisions are actually at the forefront of making those decisions for themselves and for their groups. Next slide, please. So principle number 3, liberation culture. So under this, we actively address the harm caused by systems of intersectional domination. We shift culture through our language, practices, actions, teachings, and expectations. We move with reverence for nature, and we make room for joy, pleasure, grief, and connection. And on this slide, you'll see an image that is almost like a collage or cutout of the legendary activist Fannie Lou Hamer, who is also, you know, one of the pioneers of this movement without ever naming the movement as such. And one of her most oft quoted sayings is that nobody's free until everybody's free, which to me really encapsulates this idea of the solidarity economy, that we're all in this together. It's not you versus me, it's all of us working and building. And I also, under this principle, I want to mention the current state of the dominant Canadian co-op sector, which is pretty white, which in itself is a barrier for BIPOC folks to enter and or stay within this type of work. And let me share from a personal experience that I am engaged in the co-op sector, but without Solid State and other BIPOC co-op groups like Freedom Dreams, which Christine co-founded, I myself would have been discouraged with the lack of support to continue with this work. So with respect to this principle and with respect to the context that we're operating it in Canada, I think we can all do better. Next slide, please. So principle number 4, democracy in process. Here, we define democracy as when all stakeholders have power over how decisions, resources, and work is conducted and shared. And we define process as being this difficult, slow, frustrating, but also necessary process for robust and sustainable decision-making. So under this principle, we make intentional decisions with those who are most directly impacted, as mentioned before, and that we respect autonomy and differences and try to meet each other's needs, though they might be in conflict. This is like where the creativity of the solidarity economy really rears its beautiful head, you know, that we don't just revert back to me or you, but finding ways to really meet everyone where they're at. Next slide. And finally, the last principle, principle number 5, education and development. So under this umbrella, we value deep collective study, honoring lived experiences and learning from our similarities and differences. And I should also add, honoring our ancestors and the people who have come before us and taught us what this work entails. Under this, we also empower members to articulate, enact, and advocate about the benefits of cooperativism. We democratize education. So everyone, no matter who they are, no matter what age, no matter what race, gender, ethnicity, everyone is a learner and a teacher. And as a result of our continued education, we learn to examine, adapt, and improve in response. And something that we really, really value at Solid State is continually nurturing new leaders. So it can't be just the same people, you know, appearing in front of the camera for publicity or doing the same work of outreach or internal work. It has to be different people who are, you know, interested in building this sort of relational connection over time. And under this, I just want to elaborate also that we approach learning as something necessary, but it doesn't have to be serious, you know? It's not just sitting at a desk, reading a book. It can be something playful. It could be eating together, sharing skills, doing activities and movements that we've not tried before. And again, from personal experience, I can't underestimate how much I learn just by being with my colleagues, just passively on a regular basis, just sitting with them and observing them. And, you know, my colleagues are also some of my greatest teachers. And you've probably noticed that I've cited Naisha in this presentation. And I also want to uplift Christine and her co-op Freedom Dreams as a rich source of so much of my learning about cooperatives. So if you're curious about solidarity economies in general, Freedom Dreams has a YouTube channel with a series of workshops about BIPOC-led co-ops that are moving towards collective liberation. Next slide, please, which is also my last slide. Okay, to just conclude, I know that was a lot. There were a lot of concepts and histories and information that we just discussed. So, so take a breather. And if there are any takeaways that, if somebody asks you, what did you learn in this workshop? It would be great if you could say one of these 3 things. That solidarity economics is 1, an alternative set of ideas and practices of engaging in the economy. 2, that it's value-centric, that at the heart of this economy is not profit, but reciprocity, democracy, and care for people and planet. And 3rd, that there are many forms, and worker co-ops are one form, but there are a million ways of participating in the solidarity economy, both formal and informal. And Naisha is going to talk a little bit more about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dionne, for that wonderful presentation. I'm just going to pull up mine. But I also wanted to thank Christine for introducing everybody. Oh, I'm way ahead. All right. So we can hop on and go into my presentation. So let's just get started. So before I begin, I just wanted to talk more about who I am, bring and present the intersections that I bring. So I am a second generation Bangladeshi settler. I traditionally reside on either MST territory, so Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, or in so-called or colonially known as Surrey, which is a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with unceded, stolen, and occupied Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katsi, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kakite, and Coquitlam peoples. I also really want to bring in the fact that as a Bangladeshi settler and as someone who has majority of their family residing in Bangladesh, which is one of the most affected and most affected places and areas due to the impacts of climate change, this informs a lot of my organizing. This, as someone who has roots both to methods of sustainable organizing, which I've seen firsthand, but also someone who is extremely westernized, has been whitewashed, and I'm trying to return to my roots. I also want to acknowledge that, like Dionne mentioned, in terms of what's happened historically in the Philippines, Bangladesh, and South Asia were also heavily colonized by the British. And as a result, the living conditions in Bangladesh caused my family to leave and migrate or immigrate to so-called Canada, where now I contribute to colonialism. So there is a very complex relationship that informs a lot of my organizing. I just really wanted to bring that into the conversation. Also, who am I outside of that? So I'm a climate justice organizer. I've been organizing for over 3 years now. My current project is Climate Recentered, which I'll talk about more in my just like my dream project. I used to organize with sustainability, and there's one person here who is from sustainability, and shout out Michelle. But if you didn't know, Sustainability is a youth climate organization based in Metro Vancouver who very famously organized Vancouver's largest protest in 2019. I also worked at David Suzuki Foundation, and I'm a founder of Banking on a Better Future, which is a youth movement across so-called Canada to call on the big 5 banks to divest from fossil fuels. Also, very recently, I am a co-op developer at Solid State Community Industries, where I work with the lovely Christine and Dionne. I've also been a student organizer. I am in university, alongside all the other things I do full-time. So Climate Justice UBC is another organization I work with. I also like to do art in my free time. There's a bunch of art on my walls. Maybe you can see. Oh wait. Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces of art on my wall. On a wooden background. Yeah, and so that's who I am. And I like to start off with all my presentations with a visioning activity. So now we're just gonna head into that aspect of it. So I really implore all of you to just consider, what does building a better world for all mean to you? Consider what systems are in place, how does it feel, what aspects of community care are there? And I'd love for you to put your answers in the chat. And while we're waiting for me, some things that it looks like is a world where our needs are met, where marginalized is no longer part of our vocabularies. Like I mentioned, part of my identity is being Bangladeshi settler, so being able to speak my language better than those who colonized South Asia. Yeah, and I love seeing the answers come in. Everyone has their needs met without exploitation and extraction. Everyone is housed and has enough to eat, where we can all be and live on the planet and can thrive. A better world equals no more billionaires, where species flourish, not going extinct. oh, everyone has a voice that matters. I love seeing all of your answers. It's so powerful. Yeah, the global crisis is paralleled by the human homelessness crisis. Feel trust in and trusted that things will happen in the time that is needed, not linear, space to explore, dream, play around with ideas, time for reflection, easeful. That is really powerful. I really love that, Michelle. Accessible healthcare. Just make good better. Yes, yes. Okay, maybe we can take one more minute and then we can talk more about we can go on with the rest of the presentation. But thank you all again for sharing. It always puts me in a good mood to see what everyone imagines a better world for all. I think you can see on my next slide, these are what I said before, but a world where our needs are met. I also see equity/fairness in the chat. And I really want to emphasize this last point. A better world means where the solidarity economy is no longer a concept, which is no longer a concept because it's a reality and it's something that we practice in our day-to-day lives. I also see lots of sport and play and reproduction justice/access. Yeah, and so all of these issues, all of these things that we've brought up, all of these concepts, it may seem like this is a far off reality, a far off concept, but in reality, we practice the solidarity economy every day, where marginalized communities have been practicing solidarity and mutual aid. There's a typo here, but the first word is libraries. Libraries are my favorite example of mutual aid. It's such a common thing, but also making food for loved ones, credit unions, trade. I very recently my friends and I always borrow our clothes, things like that. And so just taking some time to think to yourself, are there any other examples that you can think of? Consider how you and your family or your loved ones take care of one another. And I also, before I move on to the next slide, really want to talk about what Dionne mentioned in her definition of a solidarity economy, a world where practice shapes theory, an economy that works for everyone. And emphasizing that a world that works for everyone has happened at small scales, specifically within marginalized communities. So community gardens, community fridges, thank you for sharing, Christine. And so I just want to tie in the project that I've been working on, Climate Recentered, where we've been really trying to put the solidarity economy into practice, put in mutual aid and things like that, while tying it into the climate crisis, because as climate disasters increase, mutual aid, building community resilience is all more important than ever. And so here with Climate Recentered, we had a festival. And so here are just 4 images describing just depicting what happened. So in the leftmost corner, we have different boxes of groceries. There's tomatoes, peppers, bananas, carrots, on a table just set up. And you can also see a little bag in the corner just full of groceries. That's actually a Climate Recentered tote bag that we printed out for the event specifically. In the middle, we have 4 tables with people crowded all around it. Each table is set up with clothes, piles of clothes, because we were offering both free food, free groceries, and free clothing. And then we also have on the upper right corner a group of tents, white tents set up in a parking lot. Part of our community festival also was having local vendors, local businesses, local restaurants setting up. And in the bottom right corner, we have a band, my friend's band actually. They're a jazz band playing. And so it was a really lovely event. We had a lot of different components. Climate Recentered, because I haven't given the spiel yet, is a group of 4 femme. We're all Asian, racialized people who are based in so-called Surrey, who are aiming to recenter the climate movement from taking it to this broad narrative of white anxiety and white experiences and recentering it to focus on joy, hope, mutual aid, BIPOC lived experiences. Part of what informs our organizing is all of our deep roots into where our families came from. I like to recall how when I visited Bangladesh, I always noticed how fishermen came to my door with freshly caught goods. Just even practices like my parents saving their plastic bags to reuse, and just these concepts and how they inform our organizing. I also wanted to shout out our little news feature. So our free groceries were actually gone in half an hour because of what need there is in Surrey. I think it just shows how needed our work is and how needed mutual aid is. Yeah, and so before I head into the next part, we have all these ideas, we have all these concepts, we have all these feelings about what a better world looks like. We know that we're in a system where we're in late stage capitalism. So Dionne mentioned how Dionne did the exercise, very powerful exercise where we talked about what is a bad job that we've had. And so we have all those feelings, we have all of these feelings, just a lot of feelings. And so looking at late stage capitalism, we have to look into what are the different solutions, what are the different islands, what are the different good parts and pieces of hope that are keeping us afloat in the sea of capitalism. And so one thing is co-ops. So I'm going to go into a little bit about what co-ops are. So specifically, I'm going to talk about worker co-ops, so not service co-ops or housing co-ops. Though essentially co-op is a type of business that is democratically controlled and owned by its workers. And if we look at different kinds of businesses that are really popular in Canada, or just not popular, like that make up Canadian businesses. So we have sole proprietorships. So think of someone owning a business like a store where the owner takes full liability. We have partnerships where the partners split liability. So if you and your best friend open a store together. We also have corporations. So Walmart, so many other corporations where the shareholders are liable. Business is its own entity. Where it's public and private. We also see nonprofits, public and private corporations. We also have nonprofits where the board of directors is liable and the organization is its own entity. And we have finally co-ops. So in a co-op, the difference is that the worker owners are liable. The business is its own entity. And if you have one share, it means one vote. So I think that was a lot of words, but essentially in your business, you as your own worker are liable for your business, but you still have your own entity. So it's not like meaning an own entity means you have your own rights, which you don't really fully have with other options. And so we can look at different examples of co-ops. So this is an example from one that I grabbed from the UW Center for Cooperatives that looks at a structure. And so there's 4 little aspects of this one that create a circle. And so we have membership, elects the board to make changes to the bylaws. We have 2, board of directors, sets policy, selects and supervises management. 3, we have management, carries out policies, hires and supervises employees, and 4, employees, which carries out the tasks needed to operate the cooperative. I really want to emphasize with this structure, it's a circle, it's not hierarchical, it's flat, because I think in co-op structures, you can still have management, you can still have different roles. It doesn't mean you're above another worker. Each employee, each piece of the puzzle is equally important. I think, okay. And so we also have 7 cooperative principles, which Dionne briefly touched upon. Sorry if I'm going a bit fast. I realized we're running a little bit behind in time, but I'll just read them out to you and implore you to think about how not only do these show up in your organizing, but how they show up in your day-to-day lives. So the first one is voluntary and open membership. Democratic member control is the second one. Third, we have members' economic participation. So this means having a financial stake in the company. Fourth is autonomy and independence. Fifth is education, training, and information. Sixth is cooperation among cooperatives. And 7 is concern for community. So as a climate organizer, I've seen a lot of these show up in my organizing. Not necessarily members' economic participation, but economic participation, I think, can show up in many ways, because time also is a form of economic participation, in my opinion, because if I'm committing my time to one thing, that means that I could be working, but I'm choosing to put that hours and put that labor into this. And so co-ops show up in our day-to-day lives. I wanted to call on Van City, which is a credit union where the members are the bankers. If you're not based in so-called Vancouver, this is not a super relevant example. I can also cite Mondragon, which is the world's largest co-op based in the Basque region of Spain. It's quite a large co-op, and what I like to cite about Mondragon is that it is a cooperative of cooperatives where there's a lot of cross collaboration between different organizations. I like to talk about Evergreen, the Evergreen model, which is based in Cleveland, which is really used historically to uplift the impoverished community. Also, I like to talk, if you like cranberry juice, if you've ever had cranberry juice, Ocean Spray is actually a cooperative. And so talking a little bit more about the broader theory, because co-ops is not just about what it looks like, the legality of it all, is the idea of community and culture and how co-ops can create community where the profits, because you are worker owners and you're liable to yourselves, you're responsible to yourselves, is your profits go back to yourselves. And you're in a community, you're working together. And so you're creating a circular process where the profits go back to your community. And culture. So Mondragon, I like to cite what happened in Mondragon is how, this makes me want to drink their juice. Very, very true. How co-ops can preserve culture. Because Mondragon in the Basque region of Spain, they used cooperatives to preserve the Basque culture. So why co-ops are the greatest, take this with a grain of salt. I just like to use hyperbole in my day-to-day life. But it removes the possibility of employee-employer extraction. Unlike a corporation where you're liable to an external body, you're liable to yourself. And so there's not that varying levels of employee-employer extraction. Workers have autonomy and agency over their fair working conditions. So thus, it's democracy in action. Like I mentioned, you're not liable to external shareholders, and they're actually feasible. Like I mentioned, the solidarity economy is a reality that we can achieve, and we have been achieving it through one example of cooperatives. So at Solid State, we have cooperatives and we have cohorts, and all of our solid state cooperatives or cohorts operate under, I'm just reading the chat, operate under 2 principles of democratic decision making. And if profits, if any, are equitably shared amongst its workers. Not all solid states groups are cooperatives, but we all operate under cooperative principles. So before I go to the end, I just wanted to talk a little bit about just emphasizing a solutions-based and grassroots mindset, and looking into the pieces and the microcosms of the world that we want to create and how we're already doing that in our day-to-day lives. We are creating microcosms of the world we deserve, the world that you all mentioned, and we all work together to create a picture. And we can see this in nature. We can see this with mutual aid and how it's an evolutionary advantage. We see how birds flock together. We see how schools of fish will swim together, and how blades of grass will work together, all to create a tapestry of a living and thriving ecosystem. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. And it makes me filled with a lot of hope, which is what I like to take with all of my organizing. And yeah, and so just ending on a bit of a hopeful note, I'm not over time. Oh wait, I am, okay. I'm good. Yeah, it's fine. No need to rush, and we're trying to be anti-capitalist. And so the end is just wanted to plug a little bit of my contacts. So if you want to follow me and follow Climate Recentered, the information is there. And I also shared it with Christine, who will be following up with an email with the links. I'll pass it back to Christy.
Thanks, Naisha. No, you were right on time. We have half an hour more scheduled, which gives us robust time for discussion and question and answer. So thank you, Naisha and Dionne, for this presentation. It's interesting because I do know Naisha and Dionne, and I'm trying to do the like professional thank you, but really I just want to gush. But thank you to you both. And before we get into Q&A and discussion, I just wanted to reflect a chat that was happening in what was happening in the chat. Oh yeah, there's the comments about wanting to drink ocean spray now. I didn't know ocean spray was a co-op. Which yeah, Vanessa said it makes me want to drink their juice. And then I also wish like, is there an orange juice co-op? Because I love to do like that cranberry orange juice mix, and it would feel really good if both brands I was drinking were co-ops. We have, so Dave, thank you for mentioning Mondragon. It has been 50 years. Why has Canada not done this? We seem to redo the education every 15 years with a new label. And Dionne responded to say, good question, Dave. Solid State is about to go on a field trip to Mondragon. We'll learn, report back, and then Dave wanted to ask if they could come. You know, Dave, there's also, New York Times did a report, it was in the last year or maybe late last year, on the Mondragon model and why it hasn't been replicated in other countries. So I'd also point to that. Like if you just went to New York Times and looked into, you know, searched their archives over the past year, it's a very enlightening article about why other regions have had trouble in that last 50 years replicating that model. And I think it's also a springboard to then think about your region and the ways in which you might be able to create a co-op economy that doesn't look exactly like Mondragon's, but then might more fit your regional context. What else I cannot express, and then we have just more gratitude to Naisha and Dionne, and a link for more information about the social and solidarity economy. Thank you, Mike G. Mike G linked, and I will also include, because this is Geo. I also want to just read out the link for accessibility. It's geo.coop/articles/social-and-solidarity-economy. So thank you, everyone. Oh, and Dionne linked to the New Yorker. Sorry, thank you, Dionne. It was the New Yorker, and not the New York Times. And that's newyorker.com/business/ currency/how-mondragon-became-the-world's-largest-co-op. Thank you for just your patience with me in reading that out. So yeah, we have time for discussion and Q&A. And I think I just want to kick off the discussion by just reflecting on the two pieces that Dionne and Naisha spoke about. Dionne gave us the context of the solidarity economy, and Naisha spoke more in depth about co-ops. And I think that's an important relationship to highlight, because co-ops solidarity economy is not a new term, as Dionne mentioned. This is a set of practices that have been global and have been practiced for many centuries. And it's important to situate co-ops within that context, because as you saw from the solidarity economy principles that Dionne laid out, the solidarity economy is very much rooted in justice. The co-op principles are a set of principles and values that really guide the governance of a cooperative workplace. But my experience is they don't necessarily tell you how to ground those in justice. For example, the co-op principles will tell you, co-op principle number 3 is member economic participation. But it doesn't address what might be the obstacles to certain members in your co-op from truly engaging in the economics. Because as Naisha mentioned, we're in late stage capitalism. And as we know, capitalism is characterized by exploitation and extraction. These are issues of justice. And so in your co-op, you might have folks who have a relationship with capitalism, with money, that's based in trauma. And how do you address that so that those members can then participate democratically in your co-op? The solidarity economy principles get you there. They have you think about this framework in terms of justice, in terms of, I think someone said it in the chat, all voices at the table. Someone reflected this idea. And so I think that both of them, when you keep both of them, front of mind in your organizing, in your democratic workplace organizing, they can be powerful tools working together. Dionne or Naisha, did you want to remark on that? Or I just want to open it up to anybody and then also open it up to questions from today's presentation.
Yeah, I definitely thank you a lot. Thank you so much, Christine, for bringing that up. Because yeah, like Dionne and I have been doing this presentation together, a little bit of a shorter version for all of the cohorts at Solid State. And so we do like to have it with that two-pronged approach, because like Dionne mentioned in her presentation, the co-op movement in so-called BC right now, so-called Canada, is predominantly white, and I think is missing a lot of those principles of justice that is supposed to be very closely and intrinsically linked with cooperatives. This also can be seen, like I talked about Mondragon and how it is this huge cooperative that people talk about a lot and is highly revered, but also Mondragon has its shortcomings and shouldn't be thought of as the gospel, because it of itself started with a lot of social, like a lot of principles of justice. It was started to uplift a very economically downtrodden area that had been ravaged by the Spanish Civil War, and now is a really, really large global corporation that also has subsidiaries and workers who don't have who don't have the benefits of being worker owners. And so it's starting to reintroduce ideas and concepts of exploitation. And so it is essential when doing work with cooperatives to have solidarity economic principles to reintroduce justice. Because a lot of that, because I think I come from an organizing background, I try to have that in all of the work that I do. But it is something that I've seen is missing.
I would just like to, yes, validate what Naisha said, and also add to the point about Mondragon as this like bastion of co-op development, and want to recognize that contextually here, the question of land and indigenous sovereignty like is like the center of like what we like to think about. I think one of the centers of what we like to think about at Solid State. So thinking about Mondragon and their business model, they're very like automotive manufacturing, big parts, so factories. But here we're in Surrey, we don't necessarily have the land, nor are we entitled to that land to build projects of that scale. And so what can we do, honoring, while we honor this relationship, but also want to cultivate our own economic development? How do we reconcile this tension of like wanting to grow, but also growing within the limits of our ethics? So it's easy to idealize Mondragon as this like the end all and be all of cooperatives, but I think it's going to look different everywhere, and I think there might be a danger in just like sticking to this idea as what we hope to achieve, because maybe what we achieve has not been done yet. So I think just being open to the possibility of something new, something different, and something unexpected is important.
Thanks, Dionne. Also in the chat, Paul, hello, Paul, also recommended in terms of this conversation we're having about, tools to bring justice to your cooperative organizing. Paul has recommended another resource, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, as a complementary tool for justice, equity, and yes, pleasure. Another very powerful emotion, powerful state that within our activism, we must also make room for joy and pleasure. Does anyone want to contribute to the discussion or have any questions for our presenters, or any questions about co-ops, solidarity economy? Yeah, anything that's coming to mind. Sasha.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Do you have any affiliates in Montreal, Quebec? Are you working with any specific teams or groups, or would you like to?
Not officially. We've had some connections with the Milton Park area, but it's just been like a transient hi hello. Like we don't really have like established relationships in Montreal, no.
Oh, I'm part of Milton Park, actually.
Oh, very cool.
Yes, yes. And I'm constantly looking to learn. And I find our community right now, years ago, there were loads of awesome ideas, brilliant incentives. I was even part of a grassroots incentive to feed and clothe some homeless neighbors. And since then, nothing concrete has happened. So I've branched out on my own, and I'm launching my own company to help spread the word through social consciousness about the crises. Some people don't know I live in it. And I can't just be a person that walks by and, makes a like, oh, that's too bad, that kind of face and uncomfortableness. I'm not that person. And I'm always looking to learn and meet people who can help me along this voyage to Destination Dignity, which is my company's name.
Thank you, Sasha. I'm curious, have you connected in with the co-op movement happening at Concordia University? Specifically, there's a group called SEAS, and they do education around co-ops and the solidarity economy. Have you heard of them or connected in with them?
No, I haven't, but I'm pretty sure through some neighbors I could get further information. There is a solid group of people spreading the news. So
Yes,
thank you for that. I'll look out for that.
Yes, definitely. Please look up SEAS, Concordia University, because yes, it's also important to connect in regionally when it comes to co-op development, because provinces have different legislation when it comes to co-ops. So that's the
Yes.
best, yeah, that's the best route to go.
Okay, thank you for that. And please keep up the great work. This is awesome. I'm smiling my face off. You can't
Thank
see
you.
me. I'm having technical difficulty, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Sasha. And then in the chat, we have a question from Omar. What are the long-term goals of co-ops on a social scale? Is the goal for every workplace to become a co-op eventually? Dionne, Naisha, do you want to start off? Or, I mean, I can make a couple comments. No, the goal isn't for every workplace to become a co-op eventually. You know, co-ops are a business model that, you know, really is a business model that expounds non-hierarchical, non-extractive, non-exploitative, democratic form of ownership, but it isn't the only business model or form of organizing that your group can adopt in order to practice those approaches and those values. So, and I think that's important to recognize. Co-ops aren't looking to then become, you know, a homogenous, autocratic, you know, form of organizing. It's part of a multiplicity. And that's really when in Dionne speaking about solidarity economies, mentioned all those other and different forms of collective organizing. And Naisha mentioned it as well in speaking about mutual aid. So I just wanted to say that piece. Dionne, Naisha, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also wanted to mention Anita's answer about the labor movement as being part of the solidarity economy. Yeah, for sure, like unions and at Solid State, we're not dogmatic about the worker co-op form. You know, there are groups in our organization that are incorporated as not-for-profit enterprises, and a lot are in fact like informal collectives at this point. So it's more about the internal workings and the values of what you do, you know, because you could be a cooperative but operate in a non-cooperative way. So it's not about the forms exactly, although we do acknowledge the forms. But it's more of a holistic picture, like what Christine was saying. You know, it's not going to be this autocratic like homogenous entity of co-op. It has to be diverse, plural, and multiple, I think, for it to work, just as nature is diverse, plural, and multiple, and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just seconding what has already been said. Dionne really emphasizes the solidarity economy as an economy that works for everybody, and we don't have a one-size-fits-all economy. And Climate Recentered is actually not a co-op. We're a nonprofit. We do have cooperative principles. We all work together. We practice democratic participation. But yeah, I really like the question that Eric brought up into the chat.
Yeah.
But cooperatives is not the be all end all. My brain's got two places right now.
Thanks, Naisha. Yes, Eric's question is great. I'm going to read it out loud. Thanks for the presentations. Could you say more about Solid State's practice of eating together? It seems like a simple and powerful way to create the culture needed to support co-op development. Yes, talk about the practice of Solid State eating together.
Wow, what to say about that? There's so much. I know there's a few folks in the room who have joined us. I see you, Michelle. I see you, Selena Couture, Mahado, if you wanna If you want to pipe up, please do. I think Pam is also in the room. But to just start off the discussion, I think, well, food is a great connector, first and foremost. Whatever you believe in, we all love eating. We all love delicious food, and we are incredibly blessed to have amazing, incredible, talented, gifted cooks who prepare feasts for us every day of the week. 7 days a week, you can come in, have lunch, and it's this comforting thing, you know? And when I started working at Solid State 3 years ago, we had lunch, but over the years, it evolved into like a more ritualistic check-in where we all gather and like we answer some questions. So how are you? How was your weekend, or how have you been in general, and what you're gonna do for the day? And you know, it can be, your answers can be as long or as short as you want to. Tears have been shed during these lunch check-ins. We cry, we laugh. It's just like a way. And also I also want to mention that officially Solid State doesn't start to open until 12 noon. So I know it's pretty loose, but it's a great way to begin our day, you know, with food, with connection. And yeah, the thing is, like, after we eat, a lot of us are sleepy, so it's also like, we're also like collectively saying like, okay, we gotta wake up now. So it's another way of like, it's like a funny way of connecting as well. So silliness, playfulness, nourishment, I think it's all found in this practice of eating together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's such a simple act of like joy, but also connects to an act of resistance, because food is something that impacts everyone. It's so simple, but food prices are on the rise, and just being able to gather together in community in a society that practices late stage capitalism, in a society that has tried to divide us and drive us apart through competition, just to be able to sit together and feel the joy of eating together is such a beautiful act of resistance that I really love about Solid State.
Thank you. We've got about 10 more minutes, so if there's more questions or comments or shows of gratitude, we do have the space to welcome them.
I have a question in the meantime. Christine and Dionne, how do you practice joy?
Wow, it's a great question. And how do I practice joy? I practice joy through meditation. I practice joy through, I realized recently being by the water as much as possible is a way to practice joy. And I actually think, yes, joy and laughing is an act of resistance, particularly for folks who have dealt with like a lot of trauma. The ability to laugh is also an act of resistance. So that said, I like to watch. Joy for me is watching comedy, and my current show that's giving me a lot of joy right now it's an HBO sketch comedy show called The Black Lady Sketch Show. And I watch a sketch during every one of my work time breaks. So this is what's giving me joy. Dionne, how about you?
Finding joy a lot in dancing. I'm not a pro, I'm just a hobbyist, but I love to dance. And I love reading books. Right now I'm reading a book that Naisha actually recommended, and it's excellent. It's called And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. It's an intergenerational novel, which is really my favorite kind of novel. What else? I love walking with my dogs, you know, like this is like something I do every morning, 1 hour, 2 dogs just running around, me and 2 dogs. So yeah, dogs, walking, books, eating a lot. And today I'm already thinking about just going home and cooking like a huge lasagna. So really excited to cook this lasagna, and I think I'm gonna make it with eggplant instead of like the regular sheets. It's a special day.
And Naisha, I'd like you to answer it, and then I'll also say we got there's a couple more questions coming in. But yeah, Naisha, how about you answer that one? Do you want to share for that one?
Yeah, for sure. I think also important to share, like, I preach a lot about joy and hope in my organizing. It's definitely not a linear process. So even today, I like slept 3-4 hours because I've been like rushing everything. But even then, I've been really trying to incorporate it more and more into my life. So today before the session, I like just went to the park and I sat there and like basked in the sun. I think just going outside is a really big part of, it's just something I enjoy. I think every time it's sunny outside, I try to do something outside, even if it's just going for a walk. I really like art. I try to draw. I like to read and write as well. Yeah, I feel like I don't know, I also find a lot of joy in organizing. It's kind of cliche to say, as much as it is stressful, it's also something that has connected me with so many lovely, lovely people in my life.
Thanks, Naisha. So we've got about 6 minutes. And there's two more questions, comments. So I'm going to field both of them, but the first one, I'm just going to ask for folks to give resources, because Paul is asking if anyone's comfortable sharing your understanding of late stage capitalism, which is a new term. And great, I think someone has put a link as a reply. So Paul's asking for a definition of late stage capitalism, and because it's a new term for Paul, and any resources. Thank you to everyone. So Paul, you can see, and anyone else who's interested in this topic, that Dionne and Anita posted some links in the chat for late stage capitalism. And then the other, and this will be our final comment from Anita. Thank you for this session. I'm curious about the mention of cultivating new leaders that was mentioned as part of Solid State. Any practices to share? And this will be our last question before we close out.
Formally, I guess, just like we have a mentorship system in place, we have our co-directors who are leading us in our endeavors. And there's this almost like familial sort of support system where you have somebody to talk to if you need to learn something new. You're gonna get directed to the right sort of people, resources, networks. But I think it's more, in my experience at Solid State, it's felt more informal. Like over the years, because our relationships are really long term, it feels more like a gradual growth of certain people wanting to, I guess, like show themselves up as in leadership positions, and like certain people who have more experience, like cultivating that, making an effort to say, I see you, I know what your goals are, and let's work together to do this. And I don't think we have formal like policies in place towards this, but I see it happening. And I see it happen, I guess, with me, with Naisha, with like a lot of new members who are coming. And it's leadership, I think, in different ways. So it's not just like being, a director of Solid State, but also being a leader in your own community, in your own cohort, in your own life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize, so part of my role, and Christine are part of my main role at Solid State, is being part of the gardeners. We're not an actual gardening team. We don't dig or anything like that. We refer to each cohort at Solid State as their own plant, and the gardening team is a team of co-op developers and business developers who work with each one to help them thrive with whatever each one needs. So I think tying back those concepts of solidarity economy, of how it's not one size fits all, and there's a lot of different ways to be and a lot of different ways to exist, is I think we really emphasize that there's different ways to lead and there's different ways to cultivate new leaders, and really embracing that and looking at people's individual needs.
Thanks, Naisha and Dionne. Thank you, everybody, for joining us at this webinar. I will be sending out a survey, a post-workshop survey, and as well as links to solid state, to climate recentered. Thank you, Dionne, for uplifting Freedom Dreams webinar series. I'll send a link to that too. And I'll also send a link to the Massive Open online course, which is part of the STARCAP program called Towards Cooperative Commonwealth, Transition in a Perilous Century. The course runs from January to June. So it's actually, we're at the final stages, but there will be registration starting again in the fall. So I'll send information about that for anyone who's interested in learning more about the MOOC or learning more about STARCAP, because STARCAP is a program that complements the MOOC and actually provides financial support for Canadian organizations looking to mobilize their communities in community-led climate action. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Kevin Klein for providing ASL interpretation. And thank you to Anita, who was handling our tech. And thank you again to Naisha and Dionne, and to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
much. Thank you so much. And if you want to connect, please email me, Dionne@solidstate.coop. That's it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.